So like, for example, the Wesley brothers, one brother would preach a sermon and the other brother was at the back of the church expected to have a hymn ready to teach at the end of the sermon. That's why he wrote so many. Did you know that? Admittedly, the sermons were a lot longer, but so were the hymns. And then at the end, they would teach the hymn verse by verse, because they didn't have overhead projectors, they didn't have books, just teach them and people learn it, and then they'd sing it. And then the people would leave the church with the theology they'd learned from the sermon. So a hymn is designed to do that. And they didn't. I mean, sometimes we get a loyalty towards hymns. We say, oh, we love those hymns. In fact, I think sometimes people think, actually, we love those hymns, but really we love those tunes. Because the truth is, when they wrote those hymns, they didn't have those tunes. They pinched tunes. That's the Wesley brother writing the hymn didn't have time to write a song. He could only write the words, and he would pinch tunes. The only word pinch, it's borrow, steal, use. Whatever the spiritual expression is. So that people didn't have to learn the tune. And in fact, the funny thing is, he would, when he started using tunes that were by George Handel, who wrote the Messiah, he got accused of being too worldly. The funny thing is that the things often we most fight about change in the church are the things once they come in, we're most resistant about changing again. Isn't that the truth of it? Let me find a couple of things. This is a criticism, because we're in a change of things. But I want to explain the difference between hymns and what we do now. Criticism about this change of songs. What's wrong with the inspiring hymns which we grew up with? This is a letter to a minister. When I go to churches to worship God, not to be distracted with learning a new song. Last Sunday's was particularly unnerving. While the text was good, the tune was unsingable and the new harmonies were quite discordant. Sound familiar? Listen to this. That was written in 1890 about what a friend we have in Jesus. I love this letter. Was that the organist's idea or yours? That our peaceful worship services are shattered by that new song last Sunday. The music was sacrilegious, something one would expect to hear in a den of iniquity, not a church. Don't expect me even to sing next time. That was written in 1874 about I love to tell the story. How about one more? Pastor, I'm no music scholar, but I know appropriate church music when I hear it. Last Sunday's new hymn, if you can call it that, sounded like a sentimental love ballad one might expect to hear crooned in a saloon. If you insist on exposing us to rubbish like this in God's house, don't be surprised if many of the faithful look for a new place to worship. The hymns we grew up with are all we need. That was written in 1863 about Just As I Am. What I'm saying is, we must be careful of resisting change. I really think we must be careful. I felt God speak to me one day about this because I try, in England, I was part of a forum where we try to meet the worship leaders and we gather them once a year, all the main influential worship writers, songwriters, and we got them to meet with theologians. We want to try and raise the standard of what has been written. Because I know a lot of people say, yeah, but these new songs, they're so lightweight and haven't got the depth of the hymns they've got. Look, let me remind you, the hymns we've got are the cream of the crop. That's a distillation of hundreds of years. There were rubbish hymns written. They just didn't make it into the final book. And there are bad new songs written. But hopefully over the period of time we will get better. Remember the tension we spoke about between what the leadership wants. Leadership and preachers love a hymn because they can preach on the back of that. But that's a tradition. That really only came from the American tent revival time. Where everything pointed towards the time of decision. So all the songs fitted with the reading, fitted with the talk, everything went to that one point of making the decision. And we've still got some of that heritage. We're in a different time here. You remember I talked about these three sorts of songs. Songs we sing to other people, to each other about God, like the early church. Songs we sing to other people about God. I'm not quite sure the value of those sometimes, but that's wrong. Take that back. But songs we sing to the Lord. We're in a fantastic time of freedom where we're allowed to meet with God. And I know people used to the old tradition find that really hard because sometimes it seems to lose some of the transcendence, the bigness, the otherness of God, the fear and the awe. And sometimes these new songs sound a bit too chummy. Do you use that word here? A bit too fluffy. Where's the bigness of God? It's taken too much for granted. But there is two sides of God that he reveals to us. There is the transcendence. As the God is the Holy One who with one look across the universe could wipe us out if he wanted to. But there's the immanence of God. There's the one who draws near to us and asks that we draw near to him. I'm just looking at this again where am I here? Jesus talks about, I am in the Father, and you are in me. I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. There's a picture of beautiful intimacy. And we lose something, we destroy something that God's given us if we just go for the one. But I understand people who are used to more of the old model really find it hard to sometimes get together with the new model. But what I would say is please don't be disdainful about the change. I think embrace it is something we need to take. I'm not sure whether it's something we just need to try and bolt the two together. That's something we need to look at. Oh, past, I need to go to my... Can I have 10 more minutes? Okay. One person said, no, you can go. Oh, go! Good. Yes, I like go. In that thing by Carol, in that little essay by Carol Wimber, she mentioned intimacy with God, and a little book by Sandy Miller was now Bishop Sandy Miller, my previous pastor, and it's a little thoughts, Christian thoughts, and he sums it up well in here. It says, when I first visited the Vineyard Church in California, I discovered that one of their principal values was intimacy with God. So when I came back to Holy Trinity, Brompton in London, I started to talk about that as being one of our values too. One of the very nice members of our congregation at that time took me to one side and said, please don't use that word, intimacy. Because we don't use that word in this context. So Sandy says, I started talking about the closest possible relationship with God. It says, which is quite a mouthful. But after a bit I stopped because I realized what I really meant was intimacy. And I think that's what the Bible means about our relationship with God too. When it comes to this contemporary worship, it's not just a case, I think, of replacing hymns with these songs. John Wimber, in his essay, talked about this, of a journey of worship, of stages of this. And that, when I try to lead worship, that's what I also employ these stages. And it's not a formula, but it's a stage. I'm trying to get to this place where we're intimacy with God. We get there individually and collectively. It's not just a me and God thing. It's us and God. But the truth is, God meets us individually and collectively in there. And there's 4 stages I go through with this. And you might recognize in what we did a bit earlier. The first is like a call to worship. It's gathering us together. I mean, really, worship should be our whole life, shouldn't it? I mean, we should just be exploding in praise when we come together. But the truth is, it's not like that, is it? We're thinking of 1,000 things. So we need a call to worship. This is stage 1. Second stage is like when we start to engage with God. This is where, why do we have the flow of songs? Why do we repeat songs? Why do we make this journey together? So we need to press into this place. It's not something we naturally want to do. We would rather stand up, sing a song, sit down, get on with. And that's not pressing in with God. So the second stage is engaging with God. The third stage is where we start to listen to God. I don't mean necessarily in silence, but within the song, God speaks to us through some of the words or raises something in our hearts. He meets with us. The fourth stage is responding to God, because as we know, worship is of no value if there's no response. That response can be repentance, seeking forgiveness. It could be giving, giving our time, our money. It could be, like making a commitment, or just a responding of adoration. And those are the steps within this journey. So I thought, let me quickly tell you a story to illustrate this, and then we're going to just show you that. Buckingham Palace. Has anybody seen Buckingham Palace on there's TV, when there's history programs? They talk about the Queen and they show the huge crowds in front of Buckingham Palace, like the history about a coronation or something like that. She comes on the balcony. Anybody seen that, like on the History Channel or something? Okay, I just want to tell you an illustration and we'll show you as a model. Now, because where I lived in London, I now live here. Where I lived in London, it was fairly near to that. So when the Queen had a Jubilee anniversary or something a few years ago, I said to my youngest daughter, let's go down there. It's a piece of history. Let's get in the crowd and see what it's like. So we went down and stood in this massive crowd in front of Buckingham Palace. And we had our flags, our Union Jacks, and, the crowds are going, we want the Queen! We want the Queen! And we're waving our flag and we're standing there. It's a fantastically good-natured crowd. And it was really exciting. And then the Queen would come out on the TV program. The Queen comes out on that little balcony and she gives a little wave. And the crowd goes, yay! And then they wave the flags and we want the Queen. And she goes back in and they're all shouting, we want the Queen. And the doors open again and she comes out again and goes, ah! And the crowd goes, yay! Because that's what they do. They kind of tease the crowd a bit. Well, imagine this. Now we're going to the realms of imagination. Imagine this. One of the Queen's flunkies, in his red tights and his little funny outfit, he comes across the yard and he looks at me through the railings. He says, Mr. Piercy, the Queen would like to meet you. I've got my flag. I'm going, we want the Queen! We want the Queen! He opens a little door in the railings there and I'm in the courtyard. Not with the crowd anymore. I'm inside the courtyard. I look round at the crowd. I've got my flag. And I'm going, we want the Queen! We want the Queen! We walk across the courtyard, we go through a door in the side of Buckingham Palace. I'm inside Buckingham Palace. I've got my flag. I'm going, we want the Queen! We want the Queen! And it's a long corridor, and there's pictures of the kings and queens of England all the way down the side. It's massive. We walk down this corridor. I've got my flag. And we're walking along going, we want the Queen! We want the Queen! And then we come to these huge doors. And they open these huge doors. And there's a red car. It sounded a bit like a dog. It wasn't. It was supposed to be a door opening. Sorry. That was one of the corgis around there. And there's this red carpet stretched out in front of me with a gold throne at the end with a Queen on it. I've got my flag. And I'm going, we want the Queen! We want the Queen! And we're down this carpet and I'm stood right in front of the Queen. And I've got my flag and I'm going, we want the Queen! Now, don't you think somebody would say to me, you don't have to shout anymore. She's right here. Now, the hymns, big singing hymns and those things, they're great where we're declaring God's praise. But God doesn't just want us outside in the courtyard shouting. He says, come in. And there's a race for us to shout how God good is and sing about those truths. But we need to come to that place where we can just kneel down and say, Your Majesty. That's a picture I want to explain to you of the difference of this sort of worship. Because we're heirs with Christ, aren't we? We're in the royal family. And when you're in the royal family, there are right times to say, Your Majesty. But there are right times just to go, Daddy. It's our privilege. And we lose something if we don't go there.